Campside Media.
Hey, Campside listeners, welcome back to Inside the Tent, going behind the microphone of our favorite podcasts and talking to the people who brought them to life. My name is Vanessa Grigoriadis, and I am one of the co-founders at Campside Media. Today, I'm talking to my fellow co-founder, Josh Dean, about our very first podcast, the one that started it all, Chameleon, Hollywood Con Queen. It's the story of a huge, very notable scam in the film industry. Somebody was impersonating lots of very well-known film producers and convincing all of these aspiring professionals, hairdressers, grips, gaffers, to travel halfway across the world for a fake movie shoot. So this week, we're going to be talking about how that all went down, some of the crazy things that happened during production, and warning, there will be some spoilers. If you want more exclusive content or behind-the-scenes anecdotes from Campside shows, make sure to go to joincampside.com and become a free member of the Campside community. That's joincampside.com. Now, here's my conversation with Josh. We are talking about our first podcast ever, which is Chameleon, Hollywood Con Queen, which all came from a tip that Josh got right when we started the company, so 2019.
Yeah. Someone asked me this morning when we started the company, and I said 2020 officially, but really 2019, because this was, I think, when did we go to LA? Like fall of 2019?
Yeah, I think it was like in October, maybe. I don't know. It was warm. It was sunny. We were driving around hearing people's sad stories about being scammed by master con artists, turns out.
Yeah. Well, I'll never forget where I was. So that summer, I did a fellowship at the Huntington Library in Pasadena, this spectacular place that if anyone's in LA, they should go and hang out there. Well, I was working on a book, and I remember getting a phone call from, it was my manager at the time, who was like, I heard this crazy story, and of course this is how these things always start, and they never lead to anything. It's like, could you meet with this guy? He's got a crazy story, and how often does that turn into anything? But in this case, it was this producer, Andy, who you meet in episode 1. I think in episode 1, right? Yeah.
Yep.
At Atlas. And he was like, this crazy thing happened to me. I didn't get scammed personally, but I was impersonated. And I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. And then I think we were just starting to put together like a ideas deck. And I was like, we should do this as a podcast. And before we knew it, we were just doing it. We had no idea what we were doing, basically. We had each made one podcast at that time. We didn't own equipment. We didn't have any funding. And I believe like we paid for our own trip to LA. I think we were like putting things on credit cards.
I remember that I held the microphone, which was shocking for me because I don't think I'd ever held a microphone before. But yeah, the first thing we did, we got this rental car. We were sitting there. I remember we were sitting in one of the horrific underground parking lots that you always have to park in LA. And we were going up to meet that guy, Andy. And we started recording ourselves in the car because, of course, that's like a trope of podcast that comes from public radio. Let's hear what the backstory is. And I remember being extremely nervous that this thing was working. And then we went up to the manager's office, which was like beautiful, like Soho House is on the roof. This is underneath that. And you've got this big view of the city. And we're sitting in this conference room with like 6 very normal people, very normal like film and TV managers who make a lot of action movies, right? Yep. And they're like, let us tell you about this crazy motherfucker who's impersonating pretty much every female major Hollywood executive in town and pretending that you should go work for her on a movie in Indonesia, which is also just like so random. There were no tariffs then. We didn't have to make movies in Indonesia.
No, it was so random. It still is. It's like one of those things where people listen to the show. Luckily, ultimately, and we'll talk about that, it turned out and we made a show that people really liked and still probably talk to me about the most of anything we've ever done. But they're still like, I don't get it. Why? I mean, that's the answer. I still don't know. I mean, yes, this person made probably a lot of money over however many years, 5 or 6 years, but the amount of work that went in to get that money. And it's also not much of a plot. If you're like, I'm going to start a scam, and my scam is going to be, I'm going to pretend to be an executive and get people to fly to Indonesia to take part in a movie that's not going to exist, and I'm going to like get $20 here and $100 here by like taking on the little trips and telling them they have to pay fees. I mean, it is a objectively crazy way
Bananas.
to scam somebody.
It's a compulsion, though, right?
Yeah.
Like much more than a scam. It wasn't really so much about the money. It was obviously about the control, and it was like some sort of thing where you could see this guy might have performed at a drag queen bar and had incredible personas, and he could have played Hollywood female executives if he wanted to be Amy Pascal from Sony or whatever it was. That could have been his drag queen thing, but he decided that this is the way he was going to live out this fantasy. But one of the things that made this such an amazing podcast is that he was doing this over the phone. And when people realized they were being scammed, they started recording him. We had like so many amazing voices. Like, I'm in Stockholm. Yeah. I'm in Stockholm. Like, he's telling these people he's all over the world. He's pretending to be assistants that are also putting them on the
same
line.
Call.
Yeah, exactly. Two different voices.
He would go back and forth between, like the female executive, including one of his favorites was Stacey Snider. And then he would be like, please hold for Stacey Snider. And that would be like a man's voice. And then it would be and it all turned out to be this one guy. And of course, going into it, I should say, we already knew it was a man. But for a long time, people didn't know it was a man. They assumed it was a woman scamming people. Mm-hmm. By the time we started, we knew it was a man. There was this woman that we meet in the podcast, Nicoletta, who was already on the hunt for him. And she knew who he was but wouldn't tell us.
Right.
And I should say, like, this is one of those things that 5 years later, 5 years into Campside now, trying to imagine selling this podcast, we couldn't have. It will always be maybe the most famous show we ever made, and yet we could not sell it today.
No, I mean, that's what's amazing about it is that, first of all, we had the summer of the scam, there was the hipster grifter, then there was Anna Delvey, then there was this one and that one, and people just burned out on the scam story. But we actually have a podcast coming out in a month or two called Catch Me If You Can, and it's also just a scam story, actually another Asian scammer traipsing around the world. This guy liked to do it in person. He was really into scamming people in person. But it's so satisfying. And I think that the idea that people don't want to be told that story and don't want to be like misdirected and feeling the confusion that those victims felt and the kind of weird emotional transference that goes on and how that can really occupy your thoughts and just take you out of your normal everyday life worrying about paying your mortgage or whatever is just wrong. Like the sort of almost S-Town-esque construction of a podcast where you don't know where it's going is so much more satisfying than breadcrumbs every place you look.
Yeah, I think like I was, again, telling someone, it's a different conversation this morning, but this came up and I was like, it's very hard to sell a podcast today when you don't have an ending, even though I believe that some of the most satisfying podcasts are the ones that you start without an ending, right? Because you take people on this journey. And this is the best example of any show we've ever made still since of like literally taking the audience on a ride because we were making it like week to week. It
was really crazy. We were sitting in the incredible sound designer, Mark McAdams' home with Abakar Adan, our AP on the show. And sometimes we had Natalia Winkleman, who also came one time at least to hear the show. And then Josh and I were sitting there, just voicing and editing on the fly. And what really happened is COVID happened in the middle of it. We're home with our families. And then you called me up one day because you had talked to Nicoletta and you were like, he's not going to get arrested. And then at that point, you were like, we're going to catch him. And I was like, absolutely not. We are not.
Well, we had a version of that conversation for months where you were like, what happens if we don't find him? And I was like, we're going to find him. Because we thought going into it, I forgot that Nicoletta was basically like, I know who it is. There's going to be an arrest. And then, COVID happened and the FBI, whatever reason, couldn't get him, didn't want to get him, we're too busy. So then, we were like, okay, well, I guess we'll just have to find him. I just felt like it was because she knew it was knowable and therefore we just had to do enough reporting. And ultimately we did. And it was, I will never forget again, I think it was July 4th, Abakar called me. We didn't have the identity yet, but he's like, I've got photos and aliases. And then once we had the photos and aliases, and it turned out that Greg, the screenwriter who was the most scammed person, actually had these in his possession and just for whatever reason had never mentioned it. Like you'd think he would have said, oh, by the way, I got photos of the guy. Do you want to see them? And once we had that, we were able to identify him. And then, of course, we had the long legal discussions with our lawyers of can we name him? What are the risks of that?
I will never forget that call because, as journalists, the biggest no-no is saying somebody is the perpetrator of a crime if you don't have any backup for it. And I remember having this call and they were and the lawyers were just like, seriously? You guys want to go on a limb on this? And we were like, yeah, no, we're like not losing sleep over this. Like, I don't think you understand. We know it's him.
It
was
sure.
So clear. As soon as we saw the little bits of information that we got, it was so clear immediately that had to be the person.
Yeah, and Greg was sure. And then we worked with this guy, Ben Decker, who was like a digital sleuth, and he was able to find references to the alias in connection with this guy, Rudy Sotopo. And we were just, by the time we were ready to say it, we were very confident.
When was the part where you kept on saying to me, I'm going to sit outside his apartment in a lawn chair?
Oh, right. Because remember, we had what we found. Okay, I know what happened. Then we found his various alias Instagram accounts, remember?
Right. Oh, that's right.
And there was one where
he's a food blogger.
We were able to find pictures of his apartment building. And again, I think with Ben's help, we were able to pinpoint the location of his building because he was posting videos of himself, I think, on a balcony or something. And so, yeah, I was like, I'm going to go to Manchester and just sit outside on a lawn chair. And that will be our ending because we didn't know he would be arrested. In fact, he didn't get arrested until we put the episodes out. I don't think we deserve credit. Maybe we applied some extra pressure. Obviously, they knew who it was. He gets arrested because we were then on a call. This is where it gets meta. We were on a call about the adaptation. So,
that was so crazy.
So the podcast came out, and we chose partners to adapt it into a scripted project with. And we were meeting with them to talk about the podcast when I think one of them was like, guys, and like sent us a link, and Gobin had been arrested, and he was arrested in that apartment building. I was going to go sit outside
oh my God.
in a lawn chair.
You should have gone. I remember we got off that call and I was like, why didn't we record that call? That would have been the perfect button for the whole show.
A show that was so much about Hollywood. It was a scam story, but it was also like only in Hollywood could this have happened because it was about like impersonating producers and then all these aspirational types who are dying to break into that like cool kids club. And here we are meeting with producers who want to make a movie about the podcast. And then he gets arrested.
Yeah. That's the sad part about it was the people who were like the makeup artists or the gaffers where they didn't really know any better. They thought this was their big break. Oh my God, the big producer's calling me directly and wants me to head up the makeup department. And, these things just happen. People say there's one day there's a call that'll change your life. But they didn't know enough to be like, no, the head of the studio never calls.
Right. It would have been like us. I think we may have even said this in the show, like when we were young journalists. And if you had been like a 22-year-old journalist and like your phone rings and it's Graydon Carter. Well, of course, that would never actually we know now that Graydon Carter would not be the guy who's going to just call your cell phone. If I was 22, like dying to write for Vanity Fair and some guy says I'm Graydon Carter, I'm not going to be like, no, you're not Graydon Carter. You're like, you recognize my talent. You know that I should be writing for Vanity Fair. And so it was a very believable, like I never felt like these people are stupid. I felt like I get it. I know why they did it. Now, I'm not sure why it took them so long in some cases to be like, wait, okay, so I'm now in Indonesia and I don't even know where the film set is. Because some of them went back home thinking like, oh, I guess it just got canceled or something. And I think maybe part of that was just admitting to yourself that it's a lie hurts more than just feeling like, oh, that didn't work out. It got canceled. The movie's not happening. Because I remember once the show came out, victims continued to write to me. And there was this one guy, an actor, who I had some phone conversations with him and I was recording them all and he ultimately didn't want to go on the record. But he was like, what was so horrible about this thing was like, I think he was in his late 40s. He was this handsome guy and he was like, I tried to make it for so long. And then at a certain point I was just like, hey, it's not going to happen for me. So I'm now going to be, I think he was a bartender or something. And he's like, I'd already crossed that threshold into, I tried and it didn't work out. And then that's when he got hit with it and he got pulled in. And so to give up on it and then come back in at the last minute thinking like, oh, maybe I did get my break was like so shattering to his self-esteem. He was just like, I'm a loser, right? I didn't make it and I knew I wasn't good enough and then this guy scammed me. And I was like, oh, this was a gutting conversation because, yeah, sure, he didn't lose that much money. No physical harm happened to him. But psychologically, that dude was shattered, like completely ruined.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these people were. When we had gone on that initial trip to L.A., we went up to see the trainer, Eddie, who's in the first episode, and it was so like affecting to me to see a guy who is like the ultimate California guy. He's got a small business of running a fitness center. He's good looking. He's blonde. He's built. He's got some pull in Hollywood. He was living like a little bit north of LA, and he was so devastated by this experience. He had a lot of back problems, and he kept on. He not only went once, he went to Indonesia twice, because one of the things that the scammer would do is if he thought you fell for it enough that, even if you got mad at the end and decided to leave Indonesia, he would make sure to say, oh, no, I'm so sorry something went wrong. You must come back to Indonesia because now the film is really happening. And that was where it was really like, okay, this is genuine evil.
And Eddie, I remember, because he had a bad back, he flew business class. So here's a guy that can't afford to fly business class, flying business class because he thinks he's going to get reimbursed by this person, right? So, it was like financially devastating to him. And I remember him telling us, and the worst part was I went to the cops to report it, and they're like, okay, so what was the crime?
They sort of laughed at him. I mean, that's the thing with a lot of those low-level scams where it's not like $100,000 each pop or whatever. There's really nothing they could do. I mean, I do have to say that I think we can take credit for getting this guy arrested at least a year before he would have been arrested. At the very least, we may not have been the ones who got him arrested, but we got him arrested way earlier.
I think that's fair.
So we did stop some other people from being scammed.
I think that's fair. The podcast applied pressure for sure. I mean, the FBI was not very fond of me because we were trying to get them to talk too, and they were feeling, I think, pressure from the executives. We met Deb Snyder, Zack Snyder's wife, very powerful producer, who had been impersonated, so she was upset for different reasons. She's like, I'm a woman in Hollywood. I have a hard enough time, and this is bullshit, right? This person is using my name and hurting people that makes me look bad. I didn't do anything. So I think women like her were calling the FBI and calling Nicole. And then the podcast comes out, and it gets all this attention, and I'm sure they were finally like, all right, we wanted to wait, but we got to do this now. Let's just get him.
They did a 2020 segment about this. And after they saw you and I back to back with they told us to stand back to back with our arms crossed, in a very movie poster, investigatrix and investigator way. They were like, we got to arrest this guy.
That was one of the most embarrassing things
That was very embarrassing. That was very embarrassing. But anything for Campside.
If you watch, if you go back, there was a show called The Con on ABC.
The Con, that's right.
2020.
That's what it was called.
And they were like, this is going to be slow-mo, and you're going to walk toward the fence. I was like, oh, God, this is humiliating.
But I do have to say it's worth thinking about why we don't see as many con stories anymore. And maybe it's just because the whole world is one con right now, in the AI slop and the Trumpiverse and everything, nothing is real anymore. So you really have a sense that you have to be wary of everybody,
But this is a good transition to the show that we're making, right?
That's right, because Chameleon, which is our biggest franchise here and often helmed by our friend Josh Dean, is going to be a weekly show. Yeah.
I mean, we're in a golden age of scams, like you said. On the one hand, we don't see as many, let's say, fascinating scams like this one. On the other hand, there are way more scams than there have ever been. I mean, every day we get emails and texts and phone calls, and they're all scams, right? Click this link, send money. Deep fakes are now making it so they can use audio and video. I've heard of
crazy
parents getting calls where it's your kid's been in an accident. So Chameleon, the weekly, is going to be a different story every week. So instead of limited series, we're going to do most weeks one story. I mean, occasionally, Infamous, we'll do arcs. So maybe there'll be a 2 or 3 episode arc. But most weeks will be one story per week. And the story idea file that I have already is massive because there's so many fucking scams.
Have you ever fallen for a scam?
Luckily, no. My wife recently almost fell for one. It was a U.S. Post Office one where they send you a link and say that they've got a package of yours. And she got almost to the point where she was going to give her money. And then she's like, wait a second, this is fake. But did you read that? The New York Magazine story about the woman who
was the business columnist and she gave some guy $50,000.
Yeah, it was literally a business writer who gave all of her savings over to a scammer. So I think these are the kinds of stories we want to tell.
But I wonder if, because I don't think I've been scammed either, but what if we have been scammed, but we just don't even know we were ever scammed?
Well, that's true. It is possible. I did, and maybe still do think one of these things will backfire on us. I remember when Conquest came out, I was even before Gobin had been arrested, I was like, oh, he's going to come for us at some point, right? Be wary of every phone call for the rest of your life. And I think I kind of am.
Right. Do you know if somebody calls you and it's just dead on the line, and then you talk to that person, they're coming from like some boiler room, right? Like some scammy boiler room. Do they take an imprint of your voice if you talk to them?
Probably.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
so not do that.
Also, but we've hosted podcasts, so like our voices are out. Like, so someone could make an AI of you tomorrow because your voice is all over the internet. So I think you may already be calling people.
So for the weekly, I hear you may even update the Con Queen story.
Yeah, without giving away too much, I'll say that a lot of people reached out to me afterwards and still continue to. And so I found some really cool stuff, like the person I think was the first victim, which is kind of an awesome story. A guy who learned from our podcast what had happened.
No way.
Yeah,
really?
He had this bizarre experience where 2 years before we know the scam started, a version of it happened to him in a different part of Indonesia. It seemed to be an isolated, maybe a test case. So he was just like, wow, this weird thing happened to me. And I have no idea what it was.
Was he an Indonesian guy who was in the movie business, or was he totally separate?
He was in Dubai. He was a Middle Eastern guy who went to Indonesia. He was in the movie business, yes.
Okay.
But basically it seemed to be an isolated case and then had no idea and basically just chalked it up as like, that was a weird thing that happened. And then 8 years later listens to our podcast and has like,
oh, fuck.
It was like the cipher, the code. Like he broke he was like, oh my God, that's what happened to me. I was maybe. So anyway, like we're going to hear his story. Then I got some calls and an amazing source who was in prison with Gobind at Wandsworth Prison in London, where he still is serving. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about his life behind bars. And then maybe even we'll have the opportunity to hear from Gobind directly. Let's say, yes. So he is in that prison. I tried for a long time.
Which prison?
Wandsworth Prison in, I think it's South London. Like a serious prison. And the episode that will be about that experience, as told from some people who served with him, is quite entertaining. He has not changed his personality a lot, let's say. But then also someone put me in touch with him directly. I tried for a long time writing to him by email, and he didn't reply. And let's just say I'm optimistic about the possibility that we will hear from Gobind directly.
Excellent. I'm very excited to hear that myself. Why is he not in the U.S. facing the charges? How many years has he spent?
2020, so almost going on 5 years. And I think the reality is, like, had he been brought back and convicted and sentenced, he probably wouldn't have gotten much more than 5 years. Like, I don't think he's getting, yes, he faces up to 20 years. He's not getting that for these crimes. So I think it's possible he has already served more time fighting extradition than he would have had he come back and actually fought the case in court. Or maybe he pleads guilty and they give him 3 years. But now he's served 5 years. He still has to come back and face justice. I know enough about what he's up to know that he is fighting extradition because, and this I think isn't bullshit, like fears being sent back to, as a now openly gay man, fears being sent back to Indonesia.
But wait, forget even being an openly gay man. He can't be an immigrant in a U.S. prison. They're going to definitely send him back.
Right. That's the thing. So he's fighting extradition, as I understand it, fighting extradition to the U.S. because he doesn't want to get deported, because of course he will be deported, right? A non-U.S. citizen who's a felon is going to get, of course he's getting deported, right? That's probably the first thing they're going to do. So what he wants to do, I believe, is stay in England, either plead out or fight the case there and serve his time in England.
I'm just surprised that they haven't pled out the case yet, which implies to me that maybe the people that he impersonated are like, get his ass back here and let us face him in court.
That could be. And also I think one of the guys who served time with him in Wandsworth told me he tried to give him advice of like just plead and get this over with, because if you try and fight it and go back, like often the U.S. government gets annoyed that you've made them expend the resources of fighting the case in court, and a judge will just be like, fine, I'm giving you 10 years then. You should have just pled out. So we'll find out. Hopefully Chameleon the Weekly will answer all these questions.
So please tune into that. You will be getting, for sure, a message on Substack about when that's going to drop. Thanks so much, Josh.
All right.
Thanks so much to Josh and everyone else who worked with us on Hollywood Con Queen. And thank you for listening to Inside the Tent. If you haven't already, don't forget to go to joincampside.com to become a free member of the Campside community. That's joincampside.com.